So now it is our great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Evan Adams, the Chief Medical Officer at the First Nations Health Authority, who will be speaking about Nothing for Us Without Us, advancing cultural safety in patient-oriented research with Indigenous communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invite to speak to you. And I just want to start by saying I'm not an expert in this area, you are, but I do have some thoughts that I would like to share with you. I see that we're about 25 minutes behind already. I will try and get us back a little closer to the agenda. If you want to tweet about me, I'm at Dr. E online, at DocToreOnline. And yes, what a wonderful feeling in this room. I was at a very negative meeting yesterday where I think we were feeling quite hopeless about the state of where we were at. I don't get that feeling here, and that really helps. In my community, we are meant to speak from our heart, and so your heart affects my heart. And I think the positivity in the room speaks well for the work in front of us. We are also asked to tell the truth. Our culture asks us to be authentic because it says people can tell when you're lying, they can tell when you're faking, when what you're saying can't possibly be true. So I'm going to do my very best to tell you the truth. And I'm just looking for the slide changer. If you could advance the slide for me in the absence of... Oh, there it is. Thank you. Great. So what a beautiful territory we live in. I'm always very grateful to be here. I don't live here anymore, but I lived here for a very long time. I live in my own territory, which is called Tla'amin. But that doesn't mean that the Squamish and the Musqueam and the Tsleil-Waututh haven't been important hosts to me. This is our province from our point of view as First Nations people, 26 cultural groups, 34 different languages. That doesn't include our dialects or sub-languages. Many of us are rural and remote. We live in a very different way, sometimes being out on the land. And the majority of us live away from our home communities. We have leadership, which makes us unique. We have chiefs. I don't think there are other groups in British Columbia who have chiefs or a chief system who speak for us. And actually that chief system is one of the main reasons I've been a little bit uncomfortable in speaking to this group or representatives from this group, because we have our own way of appointing who speaks for us, which of our patients can speak to various parts of our realities. Because we have our own way of doing business, I just want to remind you that our way of doing business is that we have a circle of care already around us. We have a circle of knowledge, a way of speaking to each other, of doing business. We welcome you to that circle. That being a part of that circle does come with some responsibilities. And I've learned so much about my place in working with others by being on sabbatical in Hawaii. Hawaii is so incredibly beautiful. I can see why people would go to a particular territory, fall in love with that place, and want to spend their lives there. But when I was in Hawaii, and this is Dr. Emmett Aluli who hosted me, he's a Hawaiian man. He's a land protector and an activist, as well as being a physician. He helped to free Koho'olave, which was a Hawaiian island used for bombing by the US Navy, and to return that island to Hawaiians so it could be rehabilitated and become a sacred place again. I had to learn about Hawaii. I had to learn that the Hawaiians had their own way of doing things. They had their own ways of being and meeting together. They have their own particular history. They talked a lot about their queen, Liliuokalani, who was overthrown in the 1890s. They talked about statehood, which was in 1959. So Hawaii as a state is as old as my older sister. It's not very old. So that's really interesting because I think the age of a society has some significance. And I remember the look he gave me when I wore my shoes into his house. Hawaiians do not like slippers in their homes. And the look he gave me, and I was mortified. I'm still embarrassed that I forgot that. But he was firm. He didn't say, "Oh, you're just a stupid mainlander, not from Hawaii." He gave me that look, like, "Take your shoes off." I got to go to Kalaupapa on the island of Molokai, which is where people with Hansen's disease, leprosy, were segregated. And they were very clear, this segregation of our people with a communicable disease was not good. It was terrible, and we must learn about it. And so that particular situation reminded me that we have things to learn. My father said to me, "Our way is our way. You don't get to make it up. You have to learn it." So when I was saying to him, because our way is not to let teenage boys sleep in, it's our way. If you are man-sized, you act like a man. And you're not allowed to sleep in. We all want to sleep in, but they're particularly not. And my son was pushing against me saying, "Let me sleep in." And I said, "Dad, I don't like who I'm becoming." Yelling at my own son, maybe I'll let him sleep. And he said, "Our way is our way. You don't get to make it up." So he said, "Use water, splash him." And he got up. But that little story, that reminder, I hear it all the time. Our way is our way, and we have to learn it. And you are extraordinarily excellent learners. I have no doubt that you can learn to be with others. In fact, some of you are already probably very, very good at it. So we have here in British Columbia an agreement between the federal government, the provincial government, and First Nations to look at the health of the people. Sometimes we are cast as First Nations people as your poor cousins who live down the road. Sometimes when I speak to physicians, I hear them say, yeah, we work with marginalized communities all the time. We're really good at it. You don't have to tell me anything. Like, you don't have to talk to me about what it's like to work with your people. And then I have to remind them, well, actually, no, we're not just a poor marginalized group. We actually are part of founding nations. We have formal agreements that affect your work plan. That's kind of the strength of it. So our work together is not just built upon your personal goodwill and not just centered on your own personal thoughts, but is informed by our formal agreements with each other. Our duty and respect, which is codified. And so this slide represents some of those agreements. It also shows our leadership, that the First Nations Health Authority, where I work, has governing bodies with health leadership or leadership, like the chiefs, with health administrators. There are one in every community, board of directors, and then of course our executive and our hierarchy who create a place of business for us to work in. And generally as First Nations people, we are very holistic. We know that many things are connected. We try not to be reductionist. That being reductionist is often not helpful, but exploding outwards and saying that my one action affects many actions. I'm only one person in a whole team of 100,000 teammates looking at these issues is important to acknowledge. So we approach our decision-making in a very simple way. Nothing for us without us. the time of making policy or taking action without the people it's affecting being at the table should be over. I remember when I was a medical student, speaking to this older nurse, and she said, "Oh, you're an Indian, right?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Oh, I used to work on a reserve. We used to deliver babies. We used to have to tie those women to the bed when they were laboring." And I said, "Oh, you would tie a laboring woman to a bed?" She said, "Yeah, they wanted to deliver their babies squatting, and we wanted them to lie on their backs, so we would tie them up." And she started laughing. That's an example of a policy made without patient input, without asking the patient, "What can we do to help you?" I still remember that and try not to make those mistakes and to remember my place in speaking and caring with patients. And I was surprised as a doctor, as a clinical physician, how often what patients wanted was very different from how I thought things should proceed. We know that racism exists. It's really interesting to me how often I see in social media how often people will say, when someone says something racist has happened, how many people will say, "Are you sure? I find that so hard to believe. That's amazing. I can't believe that. That really happens. Prove it. Are you like racism is imaginary unless proven otherwise." Racism exists, let's be grown-ups, and we have many accountings, and here are some here. There are accountings of racism occurring within the healthcare system. And so part of our work then at the First Nations Health Authority is to ask workers, to help workers work within a cultural context in a way that's safer for our clients. And I will get into that. One of the things that we've offered is a course to caregivers. And because all 100,000 healthcare workers in the province are required to do this course, we can gather data on them. They interact with us in an online course, and we get to see their comments about Indigenous people. And they have, there we go. They have some stereotypes. We were kind of surprised how prevalent these very dated beliefs prevailed. People had to unlearn some old ideas and learn some new ideas, and they absolutely needed to become more sophisticated in their knowledge about who we were. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because it's kind of dumb. We are asked about health service utilization. Do we participate in the system? And we do see, actually, because the stereotype is that we interact with the system frequently and inappropriately, when in fact our data shows us that we actually see clinicians and participate in the healthcare system at half the rate of other British Columbians. There's a lack of trust. A lack of a relationship is significant. A lack of a relationship is significant. If I had a cure for cancer in my pocket in a pill, and my patient won't take it because they don't trust me, I have failed. That technology has failed, solely based on what they think of me. And we see this over and over and over again. You come forward with interventions, with resources, with your very best thoughts, with the plan, and someone doesn't trust you, and they fail to engage with you. And that we don't want to happen. So, building relationships. Just going to skip this. So we've created this commitment to cultural safety and humility in our work, including in health research. You can find this document on our website, fnha.ca. And we talk about cultural competency, cultural safety, and cultural humility. Hopefully these are not the first times you've seen these phrases. Cultural safety begins with the individual. I think probably for many of you, let's face it, we live in a multicultural, pluralistic success story called Canada, Most of you are good at seeing others with respect, or else you probably would not have gotten where you are today, I would think, I would hope. But I did want to share some ideas with you. Being culturally unsafe means to diminish, demean, or disempower an individual. And one of the most stunning stories I heard about this was from one of our champions, who was a Dutch immigrant who immigrated with his mother. And he said when his mother was near the end of her life and interacting with the system, and she was being humiliated because of her lack of ability in English or because her cultural customs were different than other Canadians, that she said, "I sometimes wonder why I came here." That's my buzzer saying I'm supposed to be ending, so I will push on. Cultural humility, then, is on the part of the researcher, on part of the caregiver, on part of the professional, that we must be able to self-reflect and understand where we are working from. That it's sometimes about us, and sometimes it's about them. So here's a cartoon about that, and I love this cartoon because it reminded me of when I was in training. The cartoon says, "Kaipo, you're Hawaiian. What do you think of Hawaiian issues?" And I felt like that conversation would happen to me a lot. And this cartoon reminded me of being in a physician meeting recently where one of the physicians was explaining to the other physicians that the non-physician members on their committees were being paid at the same rate as the physician members on their committees. And this caused some raised eyebrows. Which shocked me, because I thought, isn't it apparent that we need others than just physicians in our work, and that they are to be paid the same as us, valued in exactly the same way, and not being put in hierarchy? And aren't you tired of those interprofessional rivalries? Aren't you tired of those hierarchies where someone says, well, you know, I've been doing this for 20 years, you've only been doing this for 10 years. I have this many awards, you have fewer awards. I'm a specialist, you're a generalist, I'm a doctor, you're a nurse. Those kinds of, if we could get past those, I just want to say to people, yes, 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 I know you're important. Please, let's leave those divisions behind us and get to the work. So we've committed to cultural safety and humility at quite a large scale. All of the colleges, health colleges, like the College of Physicians and Surgeons of BC, the College of Registered Nurses of BC, et cetera, have agreed to cultural safety and humility, and we're hardwiring it into the system. And really, cultural safety and humility is respect for all. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission happened. It asks us to learn more about Indigenous health. It's quite shocking, having been to a few other countries now, including South Africa and Alaska and New Zealand and Australia, to look at Indigenous people in those healthcare systems, how little we are taught about our Indigenous roots. And I hope that all of you have endeavored to learn a bit more about this land that we're in. And just as a reminder, Indigenous people are phenomenally common in the world. There are 370 million Indigenous people in the world in dozens and dozens of countries, including Australia, New Zealand, the United States, the Americas, Taiwan, Nepal, India, China, Japan, in the Middle East, in Africa, including Rwanda and Burundi, Cameroon, and South Africa, are amongst the over 80 countries where there are original peoples who have been moved to the margins to make way for waves of immigration. And we are approaching our work, combining our perspectives, two-eyed seeing, one eye to Western knowledges, the other to Indigenous knowledges. And here are some of the dimensions of cultural safety. Self-determination, as in as in we have a say on our own bodies and in our own communities and over our families' lives. We expect to be at the table. Around respect, as I've mentioned, our identity is present and will not be given up in order to participate in research or in the healthcare system. That shame is, or negative feelings are real in our interactions, and they must be identified and knocked out of the way. Authenticity and genuineness, and that we have relationships with each other, and those relationships are not set once, they require constant work. And we need to bring not just our Western training, I think, but a great humanity, the very best of you, to our interactions with clients. And here I'm talking about a prescription pad as a euphemism. I call it skills, not pills. And I hope that you will bring your personal skills to your work, not just the resources that have been allocated to you. For us, we are decolonizing actively. What kind of workplace do we want to be in? Do we necessarily want to do things in a Western way? Maybe we want to try a different way of doing business, and I think that that's being pitched to you by Indigenous clients when you're with them. And I just want to finish by saying that we were adopted into the Wolf Clan. We're a health service organization. We could have a work culture that's like Health Canada or the Ministry of Health, like the SPORE unit, like a regional health authority. We're choosing to make it an Indigenous workplace. And when we are together, we are asked to be respectful and honorable, and that means bringing our very best to the table. And so we were adopted into the Takai clan, and we try and live up to those standards. And I hope that your hearts and minds are open to this level of interaction where you bring your personhood, your authenticity, and an open heart, and not just your big brains and magnificent training. Thank you very much.
Yes, of course. Please stick around. Thank you, Dr. Adams, for a very insightful and impactful talk, and also for helping us shave some time off. That was awesome. Thank you. I'd like to invite Kim McGrail to the stage now to lead the question and answer session. Kim is the Scientific Director of Population Data BC, and she's also the Data Director for the BC Academic Health Science Network, our parent organization. So Kim will be moderating, and there are microphones that will be roving in the audience. Will the folks with the microphones please raise your hands? Do you not? You're missing microphones? Do we have any microphones in the back? I see fingers pointing back there.
Well, they have two.
You're going to need them, unless you want to come up here. Okay. Any further microphones back there? I see a few being gathered. Okay. So we'll get that sorted out. And you're also welcome to use the conference app to submit your questions. Justin Otteson, who's sitting in the front row here from the hub, he's on the communications team, and he will be also taking your questions from the app and passing them to Kim. And don't forget to tweet. Okay, thanks so much. Kim?
It's pretty... Is this on? There we go. I failed first skill testing. So thank you very much, Dr. Adams. This is a very powerful set of comments you gave us, and it's very clear that you have probably hours more of things that you could say to us. So this should set us up well for questions. I'd ask you just very briefly introduce who you are when you ask a question, And please try to make them short. We're going to, I apologize to Chad, we're going to cut a little bit into the next session since we did start a bit late, but the more questions we can get in, the better. So is there a first one?
I'm always good for a question. Diane Finegood, the Canadian Health Services and Policy Research Alliance, I think is the hat I'm wearing today. But thank you, Evan, for so many wise words. I was reflecting when you were telling the story about our way is our way, and you have to learn our way, how evolution of ways of being and doing come into that. Where can change occur? And where doesn't change occur? I'm just not quite sure I understand how that, does that make sense, the question? You know, it sounds like, oh, we've been doing it this way for, you know, and I don't want to say this in a disrespectful way, for a very long time. Does that mean it's the right way and there's no room for change with the times?
Sure. Well, let me try it a different way, and I'll try and be really brief. The really tough lesson around otherness and respect for me happened in the delivery room, where a laboring woman said, I was teaching her how to push. And she said, how do you know? And I said, oh, well, you know, I've been around lots of deliveries. And she said, but you've never really had a baby, right? And I said, no, I don't. And I was just about to start mansplaining what I knew about labor to a laboring woman. I caught myself. It's like, why am I talking here? So our way is our way, right or wrong. I mean, I don't know if it's for either of us to decide on that. I would just hate for you to be mansplaining, for you to be the one talking in that situation. We have to know our place. So positionality, when you sit down and you put yourself in the center, maybe that's not the best approach. And I don't mean just physically putting yourself in the center or putting your perspective in the center. It's is the researchy Western way of doing things going to prevail here, or can I just be confident and put that aside for a second and really hear what patients want? Thank you.
Hi, Angela Wolf. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm currently a associate professor at Trinity Western. My comment comes from both teaching in the School of Nursing, but previously I was a director in professional practice in Fraser Health. And so I know originally through PHSA, and I'm not sure if First Nations health authorities taken this course over, but there was an online course on Indigenous history and cultural safety. It's 8 modules, and it's for all healthcare providers to take. Unfortunately, undergraduate students, such as those in nursing, are not able to take the course because of the cost. And so I'm just wondering if there is a way of reducing some of those barriers for those that really, as part of their undergraduate education, can be exposed to that. But with our Western ways and costs associated with that, there's barriers put up to be able to take that to our new healthcare providers that are entering the field. So if that course isn't available, what are other resources that might be available to undergraduates who are new into the profession and really want to engage in cultural humility?
Sure. So we have a reading list generated by the First Nations Health Authority around cultural safety and humility that we can share with you. And we know that course has not been accepted by all of the health authorities and all of the health professions. It is a bit of a pan-Indian course. It's not specific to a particular region or a particular people. So those local learnings, like saying Haichka, which is only one of our 33, it's actually a dialect of one of our 33 languages, we should be learning how to say Haichka or hello in our local languages. We should. So I guess what I'm saying is you have permission to learn about local issues and to go beyond that particular course. Though, of course, it would be great if there was an Indigenous space within the entity that's holding that local course so that that course is evergreen. Thanks.
Hi, Dr. Evans. Chad Dickey, a patient partner from Victoria, BC. My question is, you talked about parking or about putting your ego aside to work out as a team. how does that work when it comes to privilege? Because privilege is something that we sometimes do not recognize. And I think one of the things to work together, what's your idea around how to park our privilege at the door to better work together towards better health care for everyone?
Hopefully you're self-aware of your privilege, and it's not a bad thing at all. I just remember, as a gay man, I remember realizing women's only spaces in the 80s and feeling like slightly nervous about that, only to embrace it, because of course I understood, that sometimes there were other spaces that were meant for particular peoples. And if you're not aware of your privilege and you go out to work in these areas, you will get knocked. I went to a two-spirit medicine plenary recently where there were two-spirit physicians or queer physicians, and a straight American Indian physician placed himself at the center. Didn't even let the presenters finish, and he had 5 questions in a row. And his 5th question was, do gay people recruit? And I thought, wow, is he ever dumbing down this whole room? Hadn't done his homework. That positionality, his privilege. And I just had to say to him, if you're gonna put yourself there, then you're gonna take some knocks. And I proceeded to kind of knock him a little bit to remind him that kind of action is not welcome, and it's actually quite dangerous, and it brings us all down. And we actually had to reschedule that plenary. We had to redo it so that we, kind of elevated our thoughts and thinking. So I do think we need to be self-aware of our privilege. And being self-aware, I don't know about the culture that you grew up in, but where I'm from, being self-aware is part of being human. You better do it. Not being self-aware is not a great place to be working from, and it's not good for your family. Hope that helps. Too many stories.
Hi, my name is Rita Weeb. I'm a patient partner from up in northern BC, Prince George, and I really appreciate your talk on cultural safety. And, and I appreciate the stories that you've told just about, being culturally safe. I'm just wondering if you or maybe anybody else here knows of, culturally safe ways, because there's things around ageism, sexism, racism, genderism, elitism, stigmatism. There's all of those kind of things. Or if you have any thoughts about if one feels like they're experiencing some kind of labels or something culturally unsafe, how one can respond to the person that is treating them culturally unsafe.
Wow, great question. I hope we have within us the ability to forgive and to allow people to evolve, because I do think knowledge around equity is hard won, but people can learn it. They can, but it does involve some, at least for me, and I hope others will examine this, a feeling of shame. Oh my gosh, I was in the workplace and I said, "Hey girl," to my colleague, and she said, "Please don't say that to me." And I felt embarrassed. I thought, why did I do that? Why am I like that? Am I sexist? All those things, and you have to go through an emotional reaction and then imprint it and say, yeah, let's not do that again, because it's really not great. But it does involve some forgiveness of yourself and forgiveness on the part of your colleagues, because my colleagues say offensive things to me all the time. I have to keep working with them and not kind of write them off. Maybe it's about the relationship. You can't just say, "Oh, that family member's just an idiot, and I will never speak to them again," or to do that to your colleague. I hope that makes sense. Thank you so much for bringing these questions forward. That's excellent.
Last one.
Hi.
Last question.
Thank you. I'm really appreciating the discussion this morning, and I'm a patient. I work as a family mediator, and part of the training that I have as a family mediator is in managing relationships. And some of the language that I'm hearing coming up in this session is really relevant, and I think those are some of the skills that we learn through conflict resolution, which is how do you recognize differences between people and still find a way to work with them. And this is an ongoing challenge in life. And so when I heard a speaker or a questioner ask about how do you deal with things like racism and stigmatism based on age or ethnicity or cultural differences, this is something that really resonates with me. And so from my perspective, it's in managing the power dynamics in that relationship, and that's been really helpful for me in my own personal health recovery as a patient. But I'm actually looking at research in how to make that a tool in managing the relationship between physicians and patients for a better health outcome. So I'm really appreciative of the discussion here this morning. It's not really a question, I'm sorry, it's more of a comment on how I think this is really relevant, and I'm really liking it. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for being so open to this aspect of our work.
Thank you, Kim, and our roving mic helpers. Thank you, Dr. Adams. We appreciate you taking the time in your busy schedule to be here and share your experience with us. At this